Hi, welcome to intro course for our upcoming novel writing bootcamp, which starts tomorrow for our free week one. My name is Connor. I am the instructor of the bootcamps at Skill Camp, which is the name of our group of different communities that are geared towards learning skills in live and interactive online classes. So we have Script Camp, which is our sort of main server, and this is one of our new ones that we're getting going now. Script Camp has been focused on screenwriting. This is our new server that is focused entirely on writing prose, so short stories, novelettes, and novels, which this class will follow you all the way from idea to finished first draft of a brand new novel in just 12 weeks. So for the rest of the year, week by week, you'll be attending these 2-hour weekly classes, and you will be writing perhaps your first book, or maybe you've written books before and are just looking for a little more organization and structure. So WordCamp is a writing community that is going to take you from idea to draft. We have lots of free events, classes, and workshops on here and also on Script Camp. We have some of these which are for paid members, which would be VIP members or unlimited. And then we have boot camps. This is going to be our kind of bread and butter courses that are going to take you all the way from idea to draft of a new feature film script, TV pilots, or some similar writing project like that in the classes that we currently offer. We are going to be doing more classes coming up, some more free ones that will be available. And also, you should come by our other servers and say hi. We've also recently added Creator Camp, Film Camp, which would be intended for people who want to start to build this community around online content creation or filmmaking too. So here's a little bit about me. I've been a Hollywood writer since 2017, when I placed in the top 10 of a screenwriting contest and got my first manager. Since then, I've written on Creepshow for the AMC network back in 2019, and I have a thriller script set up at a major production company in town. So my background is largely in screenwriting, but I have been writing books ever since I was in about high school as well, and grew up reading and always have been a big reader, and a huge consumer of things like sci-fi, fantasy, horror, and historical novels. Those are my favorites and kind of my areas of specialty. So we have these new boot camps starting soon. So Novel Bootcamp Class 1 starts tomorrow, and then is going to be running for the rest of the year. That's going to be Saturdays from 12 to 2. All these times are in Pacific time, by the way. We have new feature boot camp that's going to start on October 7th, so it's kind of like how to write a movie 101. If you are interested in writing movies and don't know where to even start, that is a great place to do so. We will, in 8 weeks, take you through writing a feature film. Pilot boot camp, that's going to be either half-hour or full-hour-long pilots. That new one program for that starts on October 16th. That program's a little shorter. It just runs for 6 weeks. So we always have feature and TV running at the same time, and now novels will be on Saturdays too. So lots of stuff to do. You can jump between boot camps if you want to. We usually see someone's only able to complete one of these at a time. And anyone who's tried to double up has usually not found much success doing that, but you can try it at least, or you can drop by a few, just see what you like. If you're an unlimited member, you have access to every boot camp, every workshop, every lab, and all of the content that we have here. Here's a bunch of groups and things, as you can see on the right. Stuff that we have, some created by our members and by our students, such as the horror workshop or the fantasy workshop or any of these genre-specific classes. These are now group meetings that happen live, not in person, but live, talking over Discord chat once a week. You can discuss something you're working on in that genre or something you've read recently or tips or any kind of just discussion related to that genre. You can also start your own group if you have some specific area of interest that's not kind of served by anything here. Then we are open to people starting their own groups and just starting to use these spaces as a place to create and maintain that sense of community of peers who will be working on the same kind of stuff as you, who you can help out and they can help you out, and you can just lift each other up together. So here's an overview of week 0 for this class, and this is, if you were here last week for the previous week 0, this is going to be pretty much the same stuff, so you're not actually, this is just like a repeat of last week's intro, so if you were there for that, you could stay in this class and maybe we'll try to have a little time just to talk about ideas that you guys are working on which we didn't have a lot of time to do last week just because we had so many students in the class that had to introduce themselves and talk about what they were working on. So we may have a little more time for that today and actually figuring out what is it that the class is working on and what category is it going to fit into, and how do we just nail down some of these basic facts about our writing projects. So if you were there last week, maybe consider sharing a bit more about your idea today. But if you were not here last week, that's also fine, because we'll be going over lots of these basic introductory concepts as they pertain to book writing. Things like thinking in words, what is a novel, what are we actually writing here, compared to novelette, short story, or novella, or these other sort of forms of writing. We will open up sketchbooks and start on sketchbooks today, which are not actual drawings, not sketching in the sense of, fine art drawing, but sketches in the sense of kind of idea sketches where you will be writing down all your disparate, unconnected ideas as they pertain to your project to just keep all your brainstorming in one place. So we'll be starting those today. We'll look at ground rules for projects and the kinds of things that we're going to encourage you to be choosing in the class. We'll look at student goals, and you can feel free to share what are some of your favorite books or authors, or what are some of your aspirations. Who are you trying to write like? What kind of thing are you trying to make? Why? Anything that inspired you or motivates you, or was the reason that you decided to write books in the first place. We'll break down the difference between kind of modes of writing in terms of literary, upmarket, or commercial. That is going to sort of tell us about the style of writing, as well as our age category, or target market, which is going to be adult, YA, or middle grade for the most part, unless you're thinking of writing chapter or picture books. We then have genres, definition, expectations and promises that are included in each genre, and the things that we should be looking at, paying attention to, or making sure to include in our own books of these genres to make sure that the audience does not leave disappointed. And then we'll go over that whole overview process of how to actually write a book in 12 weeks. What are those different steps going to look like? What are we going to be covering? How are we going to be approaching this? How much are you going to have to do per week? What are you going to be turning in? All these questions and more we should be able to fully answer today. And make sure that if you're interested in this, you come by tomorrow for that week 1 class, which is Saturday tomorrow from 12 to 2 Pacific. That would be 3 to 5 Eastern time. Okay, that's the overview. Let's move forward and look at our first couple slides here. Our first one is going to be about creating this sketchbook. So before anything else, go to Google Docs. You should probably have a Google Docs account if you have a Google account or a YouTube account or a Gmail account, anything like that, and make a brand new Google document where you're going to use to keep and store and organize all of your different ideas, questions, research material, and notes for this project as you continue to develop it. So you don't want to have this in 9 different notebooks all around your house. You want to have these all in one place in an easy to, you don't have to worry about saving it or losing it. Google Documents is cloud-based, so it saves everything automatically the whole time. You can access it from any computer or your phone or a tablet with no problem at all. It's better than Microsoft Word in that respect, so you can, just get it from any device. You can share these things really effortlessly and collaborate with them in real time with other people if you want to. So Google Docs is just a really efficient and nice way to be managing and organizing all of your pre-writing, pre-writing being everything before you actually start those pages of the book. So I highly recommend go to Google Docs right now, start a new document called Name of Book, Sketchbook, or you could just call it Sketchbook if you don't know what book you want to write yet, which today hopefully will maybe give you a little boost to figuring out what book am I actually trying to write, how do I start to kind of gather my ideas that are flying all over the place and maybe are sort of disorganized right now, but how do I start to bring those together into a more cohesive vision for what it is that I'm trying to create over the next 3 months. So everyone should go ahead and do that now. No one has any questions on this, do they? And throughout the whole class, you can use our text chat. Go ahead.
Could you hear me?
I can hear you fine. Go right ahead.
Hello, I'm Lorraine. I haven't got a clue about computers or anything else, so it's all gobbledygook to me, so I will be writing it all down.
Okay, that's all right. So do you have a Google account, do you think, or a Gmail account or something like that?
Yeah, I do have that. But I don't know how to access it while I'm on the phone talking. I don't know anything about it.
Oh, okay, you're on the phone right now. I see. Okay, no big deal. I would just maybe open, if you have even a notebook with you or something to write on or anything along those lines, just to keep all your ideas in one place. You don't have to make the Google document right now if you can't access it or are not sure how to. We can try to help you with that later.
Yeah, well, my son's here for any help later as well, so you can talk to him.
Okay, great, sure. We'd be glad to do that, but the goal here is just to not have a bunch of separate documents. We just want to be organizing all your ideas in the same spot, so we don't lose anything.
Can you actually see me? Can you see
No, no,
people?
no. I have
Oh,
my camera is on, but for the most part, this is voice only.
yeah.
I have a slideshow.
Luckily,
Maybe you're not able to see the slideshow at the moment, which it has text and stuff coming up that is going to be clarifying some of these points. If you're only able to hear, though, I can make sure to just let you know what we're doing on the screen.
thank you.
Sure. Okay. Any other questions on just creating the sketchbook? If you don't have access to Google Docs right now, you can open Microsoft Word if you really want to, or you can use some physical piece of media around you if you really want to be writing by hand or something like that. Just make some kind of place to keep all your notes in one location. Any other questions on that? Okay, let's keep going. So, a couple ground rules to begin with. We want to get used to the idea of sharing early with me and with fellow students and with everybody, even at these early stages. Writers can be very sort of touchy about sharing work. All artists can be. I mean, we are artists, so this is what artists do. This is what artists are like, so we're very used to this. But in order to get good feedback, you have to be able to articulate what even the early version of your idea is, and be prepared to hear things like, oh, I'm not sure that that is the best way to do this. Maybe you could try changing these things. Like, be prepared to hear that some aspects of your idea might not work. Like, if you're in a class, you're in a boot camp, so our projects are probably not going to be perfect right out of the gate, and that's okay. You just get used to the idea that you will be hearing feedback. This is going to be tough sometimes for some people to hear at early stages, but don't take it as discouragement. No one is like attacking or discouraging your ideas. We are just trying to guide you and create the best version of this that you can. Trying to help you create the best version of what you are trying to make. So just be prepared to be hearing feedback, and maybe more than you've heard before, especially in a class that we're describing as a boot camp. We have only a limited time to get through the writing process. It's, normally you have potentially years to write a book. This is a very accelerated version of that in a much more organized manner. So in order to do that, we need to follow certain rules, and you're never going to be forced to change anything in your writing that you don't want to change, but just be ready to hear that and receive that feedback gracefully. And even if you don't agree with it, you can always just say, thank you for your feedback. I'll think of how I can make that work. And ultimately, it's your book, so you do what you want with it. So after this class, you're going to want to use a real name or anything that is a real name instead of a screen name for the class. If you're already using one, that's fine. If you are using a screen name for now, you can right-click on your name on Discord and change it to either your real name, which is ideal, or perhaps your middle name, nickname, your cousin's name, something like that, just so we're not using screen names to refer to each other during the course. Ground rules. So if you don't have an idea yet and you don't know what book you want to write, so folks will be approaching this from a couple different angles. Some folks have some book that they've wanted to write for a very long time. They know exactly what it's supposed to be. They know exactly what it's called and what happens in it. Some maybe don't even know what genre they want to write or don't even know where to start. And either one is okay. The goal is to try to decide pretty quickly, usually, because we want to just make sure that you're going to meet the milestones of the class. But if you don't have an idea yet, maybe think what's some kind of crazy different thing that has never been done before and nobody would ever write except for you. You've never seen some example of this maybe, or you think this would just be awesome, but maybe pick something that you're going to be a little less attached to is something I always recommend. Some different weird concept, something that you don't have to rely on it being very good, because your first books are not probably going to be very good. So instead of picking something that has to be a masterpiece before you'll be satisfied with it, we want to get used to the idea of you're going to write something, you'll do your absolute best, you finish it, and you move on to the next thing. Because most authors are not going to sell their first book they write. They're not going to sell the first 5 books they write. It takes a long time to get really good at this and to be writing material that is commercial and publishable. And even once you are doing that, it takes a long time to get a career going doing this, to actually meet with a literary agent that wants to represent you and then have them submit to publishers and then to have that sold to a publisher. And all these things, it's a very long timeline, and it requires an enormous amount of patience and dedication and skill. So don't expect your first book to be a masterpiece right away. Don't expect this to be easy right away. If you've never written books before, this is an incredibly difficult skill that takes a really long time and a lot of mental and sometimes physical effort. You may have to get up early to find time before work to put in the words per day. Whatever it takes for you to finish. Everyone has different methods and tactics that we can use, and part of being in a boot camp is that we will try our best to keep you on track, keep you motivated, and make sure that you are finishing these milestones by the appropriate times. This all is intended to be enjoyable and fun, but actual writing is not always enjoyable and fun. And the kind of mark of a professional is someone who can push past that time where it stops being fun, and even though it gets really difficult and painful and challenging, you see it through to the end and do your best and move on to the next thing. So, we're going to write a book in 12 weeks. Will it be good? Probably not. That's okay. It's a first draft. First drafts are, first of all, just never all that good. And second of all, even once you write the 5th draft of it, is it going to be good? Probably not if this is your first couple. And that's okay. Any individual manuscript doesn't need to be good. You're trying to build your skills, and you should look at this more like you're lifting weights at the gym rather than you are trying to unearth, a perfectly formed novel that exists just beneath the surface. You're not digging for gold. You have to lift the weights and run the laps before you will get there. So I focus on this very practical method, very practical approach, and we're very, very brass tacks here, very nuts and bolts. Did we have a question? I thought I heard someone. I could be wrong. That's okay. So, any individual book doesn't have to be good. Any script you write doesn't have to be good. Give yourself permission to do a bad job or to write something that is not perfect, and you will just find that it frees you to write a lot more. And simply writing a lot is the first kind of, I'm going to say it's the second step to being a writer. The first major step is you need to read a lot or get reading. And we'll have some choices of different novelettes to choose from for reading if you want to read something by tomorrow. They're pretty short. They're like about 10,000 words, so you can read it in one sitting. If you don't want to pick one of those, you can pick one of your own, but I would suggest reading a novelette or novella by tomorrow if you can. If not, then maybe just start something of your choice and be reading all throughout the course. You need to be reading. So let's look at the steps. We're going to start with, and these things are going to be as of the following week. So don't worry about these for right now, but this is a look ahead at what is coming in the course. We're going to start with a log line. A log line, if you don't know, is one single sentence that expresses the premise of your story. That might be saying, who is the main character? What are they trying to do? What is standing in their way? What is the kind of time frame that this takes place in? There's not just one way to do this, but it's best if you can have some one-sentence expression of your idea written out that's going to both help communicate what your idea is to other people in order to get them to read it, because most people won't read a script or a manuscript just based on a title or just based on you asking them to, unless they have some idea of what it's about. Even the readers in your life, your friends and family, they'll probably want at least one sentence describing what it is that they're about to sink, 20 hours into reading? It's a lot to ask of someone to read a whole book, especially if you're not a professional. You know it's not perfect, you know it's not the best. It's a lot of commitment on their part to read that, so we want to just make sure we're giving your readers the best possible experience with this. So we want to make sure we have that really strong logline to just help communicate what your story is, and also to help you keep on track, because it's very easy, especially for a book idea, for it to just blow up and get way too complicated, way too many moving parts, and just having that one sentence at the core will just help you keep that thread unbroken, and you're gonna just be able to keep your progress much better and stick a little closer to your original vision. It can change by the end if you need it to, but that one sentence as your kind of guiding principle, like your North Star throughout the writing, it's really useful. So next, you're going to want to try to fill out that sketchbook, and we can imagine that the steps might be switched around. We'll come up with put stuff in the sketchbook first, and then you'll figure out a logline eventually. We don't need to have the logline ready as early as we do when writing a movie, so don't worry about having a perfect logline ready by tomorrow. So the sketchbook is just going to be where you're keeping all of your research information. That might be, if you're writing a historical or science fiction novel or something that takes place in a different world, you might have to do a fair amount of reading and research on your own. And I would keep it in the sketchbook just because we don't want to have all these different documents that we have to sift through in order to find your material. The sketchbook is also going to be just like a collage of all the pictures that have inspired you, videos, links to websites or encyclopedia articles or anything else that will be useful for that, just research purposes, and then ideas that you have for characters or scenes that you know are going to occur in the book, or important dates in the story, or a timeline of events, or ideas for lines of dialogue, just literally any idea. There's nothing wrong that can go in the sketchbook. It's a place to keep you organized and to keep all your ideas in one place. Okay, after we do these things, the next goal is to come up with a story beats roadmap, or you might call this a story beat synopsis. Synopsis is a word that can mean different stuff in novels, though. Usually a synopsis is going to be like a 2-page summary of everything that happens in the book, so we're not really going to use the word synopsis as much here. But your story beats. What are story beats? Well, stories have structure to them. There are different structures that you can experiment with, but for the most part, in writing commercial fiction, which this class is largely going to focus on, you are going to be writing in 3-act structure: beginning, middle, and end. Setup, conflict, resolution, or climax and resolution. We're going to have 3 acts, and if you're not familiar with this, we'll get much more into this, and my screenwriting classes cover this topic extensively. But within those acts, there are going to be certain moments that most stories sort of use to operate. Like, we have our introduction sequence, like your first 10% or so, where we're getting to know the character, we're learning what's wrong, what's missing in their life, what do they want, what do they need, these things. And then you move from your intro to your catalyst, which is like that event that kicks the story off. We have these just moments that we can define throughout the structure that you can start to use to build that picture of what the story will look like. So we can, if you already know, for instance, you already have a great idea of what the grand finale is going to be. It's going to be a final battle between all the good guys and all the bad guys. Then you can put that down on your story beats roadmap first and work backwards from there, or work forwards from an earlier point and kind of fill in the gaps. So having that story beats roadmap is going to be important because it's going to tell you, well, I know these just major events in the rough order that they need to happen in for the whole story. The next thing you're going to be writing, though, is the scene cards. And scene cards, they don't have to be actual physical cards, though some people really like to use real index cards or note cards or something like that, sticky notes. But at this point, I'm just doing, these are all just digital documents, the exact same way that I write all these other steps, and this is going to be an expanded version of the story beats outline with a full paragraph for every single scene in the book. We can get more into what scenes are or how scenes work throughout the rest of this course, but I think we have some understanding of what scenes are. These are like these dramatic moments that are going to sum up to your whole narrative, and we want to have a good idea of what's going to happen in each of these scenes before we start the book. Some people are much more kind of spontaneous writers that try to write the whole thing by the seat of their pants and just get going at the beginning and with a blank page, and they just start. This course is going to focus on a really organized and methodical method, a very organized method, I should say, of planning. So we're going to be architects for this course. You're going to figure out what happens. It doesn't have to be on every single page. You don't have to know what happens on every page, but you should pretty much know what happens in every scene. And there's going to be room for discovery along the way. There's going to be room to change your mind or to go off course or to leave the confines of your outline if you need to. But I would just try to get into the habit of writing outlines that you can mostly stick to. If you try this whole method and you find this doesn't work at all, and you love writing books on the fly and figuring it out as you go and not planning anything, then you should totally do that. I can't really teach that method, and maybe this isn't the best organization style for you, and you just need to figure out what works from it and only take out the parts that work. And that's the thing with any class, any course, any book. Nothing is actually required to be a professional. You don't have to take a class or a boot camp to be a professional writer, but it's going to give you that structure, that sense of organization to it, and that group that is going to be working at the same pace with you in order to get through their idea at basically the same time that you are. So these scene cards, they can be, some people like more detail, some people like less, but essentially this is to help you figure out what happens in every part of the story before you begin writing those pages. And last, we have go to pages. This is a screenwriting term that I still use just because I am mostly a screenwriter. But when we say you go to pages, that means you move from the planning phase into the actual writing, staging scenes, writing dialogue, just writing the actual book. So you're going from this outlining into the actual writing process. That's step 5. So we have quite a few steps. There's quite a couple weeks of just figuring out what is it that I'm writing, and where am I going with it, that we will use before we actually start pages. So don't worry, you don't have to start pages anytime soon, not for several weeks. And we have at least the first half of this course is all planning, figuring out what happens in the book and why, who are your characters, what are the conflicts, what happens in every single scene. as best we can, we want to try to figure that out by our halfway mark. And then for the second 6 weeks of the class, you will be writing about 2,000 words a day until we conclude in December. Okay, so any questions so far just based on the overview of the class? All right, if there's no questions, we will keep going. Let's continue to thinking in words. So we're going to talk about what is the difference. Well, first of all, what is a novel? And second, what is the difference between a book and a novel? So a book is a handwritten or printed work of fiction or nonfiction, whereas a novel is fiction. A novel is not a true story. Well, although it can be a fictionalized version of a true story, or an account of a true story, or something like that. But generally, we divide fiction and nonfiction in saying this nonfiction is an attempt to accurately portray exactly what happened. It's almost, journalistic style, historical style writing, where we're trying to be as accurate to the facts as we can. Though I understand there is creative nonfiction and things along those lines, but for the most part, we're trying to tell true stories. And novels are going to be made-up stories or made-up retellings of stories or things like that. It's a long prose document that describes fictional characters and events. And that is going to be that major difference. A novel's a narrative as well, whereas a book can be almost anything, right? A book doesn't have to be a narrative. A cookbook is not a narrative because it's not telling a beginning, middle, and end story. It's a series of recipes. Any kind of instruction manual is not a narrative. A novel is strictly a narrative. So this is for writing. This course is for writing fictional works of written word between 50 to 90,000 words. So I want to look, just before we get into introductions and things like that, let's just look briefly at some of these basic definitions for how many words are going to be in this book. So a short story is 1 to 10,000 words, more or less. Some sources even say the max is about 7,500 words for a short story. They max out around 10 to 12. And then our next step up is going to be the novelette. Most people don't really know about novelettes, but these are really popular, published online. On websites like Tor.com, which has some really great science fiction, fantasy, and horror novelettes in the 10 to 20,000 word range to choose from. And these are going to be usually not in stores. You're not going to really buy novelettes in stores, but these are going to be in magazines or published online. And then novellas, sometimes you'll find them in stores, but usually from very established authors. It's pretty rare to get a debut novella published, but it's possible. These are 20 to 40,000 words. So again, short story, 1 to 10,000 words. Novelette, 10 to 20,000 words. Novella, 20 to 40,000 words. And after, 40, 50, somewhere around that range, we get into novel territory, which most novels are going to be between 50 and 100,000 words. Some genres skew a little longer, up and towards, 120 to 150 for things like historical epics, fantasy books, things like that, which people just expect a little more world building and scene setting and things like this from maybe more historical context or things like that. People expect those to be a bit longer. Books seem to max out around 200,000 to 300,000 words for like incredibly long fantasy tomes and things of that nature. I think you really will have a lot of trouble getting a book published over 300,000 words, even as an experienced author. So as a debut, you're going to be looking for the most part at 100,000 words or less for your book. And for this class, I recommend 50 to 90,000, meaning that, remember, we're writing this in 12 weeks total, so 6 weeks of planning, 6 weeks of writing. If you're writing 50, 70,000 word books, you're writing about 10,000 words a week, and that's, more or less 2,000 words every weekday with weekends off. So writing 10,000 words a week is a fantastic pace, and most people can't really sustain that for long periods of time. But for a couple months, 2 to 3 months, I think that is a pace that people can find a way to sustain. And it's okay if you don't there's no actual deadlines for this. If you run over the time frame and you take longer to finish your book, that's okay. There's not grades in this class or anything like that. We're just trying to get you on track to finishing your book and then moving on to the next one. And there's going to be, we have some ideas on revision and things like this, but the real struggle for a lot of people is just finishing that first book just to show that you can. Series, we're not going to focus on series in the class really. I recommend that you try to write, if you are thinking of writing series, writing all of your books as stand alone with serious potential, which is the kind of buzzword that most agents want to see nowadays. So it's a book that works entirely on its own, and it is a complete story. But potentially you can see that there would be more life in these characters, more road to go on to solving their problems, that maybe there is more conflict in the world that needs to be ultimately addressed or resolved. So standalone with serious potential is what I highly, highly recommend writing if you are trying to have a career as a debut novelist now. If you're just trying to write your one masterpiece or something like that, you can do whatever you want. You really don't have to worry about this series kind of idea. But series sell well, and especially in the genres that I am focusing on and specializing in, people love series. So you could at least consider, maybe after you take this bootcamp, maybe you could take another one later and write that follow-up book. But again, for the most part, you're trying to just write a single book. And we're trying to get through it, and it's okay if it's bad. You've given yourself permission to fail, permission to do a bad job, and we're trying to just climb that really difficult hill of completing the manuscript. So, any questions on word counts? Again, I'm just going to relist them just so you have it all really concisely. Short story, 1 to 10. Novelette, 10 to 20. Novella, 20 to 40. And a novel is going to be basically, for what we're doing, 40 to 100. Those are in thousands of words. Questions on any of this?
Question. What's
Go
the
ahead.
difference between series and novel?
Well-
It's just word count or anything else?
Well, a series is going to be multiple novels. So a series would be like, Harry Potter is a 7-book series, or Lord of the Rings. There's 3 main books. These are going to be just like if you're writing a book that is intended to be part of a series, maybe you wouldn't want to resolve absolutely everything. It's not actually going to affect the word count, but it's just going to affect your writing of the story itself. Other questions?
New generation.
Sorry, can
I
you
have
ask the
one more
question? Go ahead.
question.
Yep, go ahead.
My question is, when we write novel, idea generating, the time, what thing we have to think about the idea and how I elaborate my ideas.
Yeah, yes. So you'll be elaborating on your ideas. We'll be talking a lot about premises and originality and these things over the next few weeks. Wait, sorry. What was the question?
Yeah, my question.
That answered your question? Okay. Any other questions? Okay. So let's look at our discussion page. So now is the time where you guys can unmute your mic, which if you are not sure how to do that, there's a gray microphone icon in the bottom left corner of your Discord screen. You can click on that to mute or unmute yourself throughout the course. If you're on a phone, it will be in a different spot, so don't worry too much about it. But let's start. We're going to just, I'm going to go down the list and I'll just call on each member who's shown up here. You can tell us whatever you want about yourself, maybe favorite books or favorite authors or genres. What have you written before now? What are your goals? What are you hoping to write? Are you trying to be a career novelist, or are you just trying to get one project off your mind or something like that? Feel free to just tell us whatever you want in like a minute or two, and the floor will be just totally yours. So let's go down the list. We will start with Alien Boy.
I don't really have any favorite books or genres, but I am trying to I'm just trying to be a writer of sorts. That's my main goal, just to be a writer.
Okay, just a writer of everything and anything. You just want to get better at using words, basically.
Yeah, because I do have stories in my mind that I want to. I've said this before. I have stories in my mind that I want out.
Okay, great. Yeah, well, this is a perfectly fine way to do that. This course is geared towards people who want to be career novelists and want to make a living doing this, but even if it's just you want to get better at using words, then a course like this is a fine way to do that too. Thank you for that. Let's keep going down. Asmani.
Thank you so much. I'm Asmani, and it's my pen name. I have a two pen name. I'm in writing last 7 and 8 years. I have a blog, and my favorite book is Rumi's poem. I'm trying to mix up a poetry book with Arabic and English, just trying to write something differently. And my goal is to be a good writer, and I want to write for social change. Thank you.
Thank you. Social change. That's awesome. Okay, great. So, yeah, some writers have the goal of I just want to write entertaining stories, and some writers have more specific goals, like I want to actually change the world in some way, or I want to change culture, or I want to, change how people think about something. So, any of these are totally valid, and you can approach this from lots of different angles. So, thank you for that updates, or for that information. Let's check with Carmen. Are you there, Carmen?
Sorry. What was the question?
So this is the discussion. Tell us about yourself. Tell us your goal for the course, favorite books and authors, what do you want to write and why, anything like that?
I'm just trying to improve on writing. So I'm just practicing writing all the time, and I do have a lot of different things that I want to write. I definitely need to be reading more, and I did start reading Those Across the River, and I'm really enjoying it.
Oh, I'm reading that now too.
Yeah, I saw that you're reading that, so I thought maybe I should read it too.
Cool. Okay.
So it's pretty interesting. It's a lot of build-up,
Mhm.
right? Which is cool.
Yeah,
I don't know
modern horror
about-
books sometimes. Sorry to interrupt. I'll let you finish. I just want to say
Okay.
modern horror books usually have like sometimes it's up to half the book of just like meeting people, like immersing in the place before the really crazy stuff starts happening. So I'm not even halfway through that book yet too, and I'm like, oh boy, when are we gonna get to the? Is it werewolves? I don't really know. There's monsters of some kind. I know that, but yeah, it seems cool. Sorry, go ahead with your.
It's okay. I'm just trying to get better at writing all the time.
Mhm.
So I just trying to write as much in different genres as I can, and trying to challenge myself to go into a higher level of writing all the time.
Mhm.
And I just struggle with feeling like, okay, I think I read that somewhere before, and just trying to write it differently without using the wrong words or a style that doesn't suit the genre or something.
Mhm.
I have a lot to learn, really. And I'm just trying to figure out how to turn in the script for the reading for Sunday. I went through The Widow's Slayer, and I think I'm going to start with the first thing that I wrote and then work my way up. Because I'm kind of not ready to really share Rattlesnake Canyon right now, just because it's really scary, and I feel like I'm assaulting people or something psychologically.
Some people love that though.
Okay. Because in the horror class, Gary was like, "That's terrifying," or he was like, "That's horrifying," and I was like, "I'm sorry." I felt
No,
like I
that
was
means you did a great job.
Okay.
Yeah.
It just kind of feels weird to it caused people to have negative emotions. It kind of feels weird, like kind of wrong in a way.
Mhm.
I don't know. Maybe I should be writing comedy or something. I don't know, but yeah. So I'm not a really interesting person or anything, but yeah, that's basically just trying to get some practice in until I'm really good at writing. Finally, after all this time, you know,
Thank you.
years and years of writing and the
Sure.
torture of it all.
It's a long road. And do you have a favorite author?
Yeah. I kind of really like Doris Lessing. Okay, so my goal in this last book that I got this editorial review, I guess the chapters that I sent in as, and this might actually help somebody in here. The chapters that I sent in that were the sample chapters were written, everything was in real time with no flashbacking and no internal monologue at all whatsoever. So the editor was thinking that the entire book was like that, like in real time, limited stream of consciousness kind of stuff, right?
Mhm.
And well, come to find out, I'm way off on the structure of what's considered commercial. So now I'm going through that rewrite. So I'm doing a lot of writing by hand to, flesh those things out. And she says I'm really good at dialogue, but I have very, very little dialogue. I don't really like dialogue that much, but I guess according to her, I'm really good at dialogue. So I'm going to be working on increasing the amount of dialogue that I have in my writings. So that's a really direct goal of mine, I think, increasing the amount of dialogue and ceasing from telling but showing, because which basically has to do with not being lazy. It really is about laziness, it's so much more difficult to really go into a scene and give those details and give that dialogue rather than just stating, just kind of summarizing things.
Mhm.
And then when you're up to 80,000 words, you just feel like, well, I don't want to make this, like a huge, 100,000 word thing. It just has to do with being lazy. And so I find that writing by hand is really, really helpful. That's how I get material, and then I just develop it further when I guess they refer to it as digitizing it,
Mhm.
the material. When I start typing in, the little clicks kind of do help for developing material further. So right now I was just going through the Widow Slayer to remove anything that would be overtly confusing to a reader. There's a lot of text there. I mean, it's 20,000 words in that script. In a, it's it's only 92 pages. So that seems kind of wordy, or what do you think?
I don't know. I've never measured the number of words in a script in my life. We just talk
Oh.
only in pages in scripts, and we talk pretty much only in words in books. I've never tried to measure, but that's an interesting question.
Oh, okay. So I'm gonna go ahead and turn it in. I guess I just go to the event page to do that.
For the reading, you can send
Mhm.
you can send a message to either Gray or Nacho in order to submit if you want to, or I'm not exactly sure the process, but they can help you with it.
Okay.
Thanks, Carmen.
Okay, thank you. I don't want to take up too much time.
You're good. Thanks a lot. And Nacho says in the chat, most scripts are 14 to 20,000 words. All right, good to know. I had no idea. But generally, in scripts, word counts are not what we're really relying on, and in books, page counts are pretty much irrelevant because, as we'll get into in the slideshow today, with a different font style or size or layout, any number of words can fill any number of pages. Let's keep going with our introductions. We will check with Heather. Can you hear us, Heather? So I'm seeing that Heather's mic is muted. I can come and check back with you in just a minute. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, I clicked out by mistake. I'm on my phone.
You're good. I can hear you now.
Okay. I have. This is my first attempt at a book, so I have published poems, but never a novel, and that's basically what I really want to do.
Poetry?
I have a lot of favorite authors, everything from Chuck Palahniuk, Stephen King, Laurel K. Hamilton, Charlene Harris, quite a few. I've been writing since I was a little kid, but I've never really finished a novel.
Okay, great. And what kind of thing do you want to write? Do you know what genre?
It's kind of like a mystery drama. I already know the storyline that I want to do and what I want to focus on. I'm just right now I'm working on building up the characters, and I don't want to. I'm not sure how many characters I want to introduce because I don't want to. I want to stay focused on the actual storyline because I'm not really good at building characters. That's my biggest problem that I need to work on.
Yeah, we have a whole class on that in this course. It's like number 4 or 5 is just on characters.
Good.
Awesome.
That's
Thank you for that. So,
Thank you.
mystery novel, you already know how it goes, so you'll have a bit of a head start. And if you have a couple different documents or like different notebooks full of ideas for it, I would just try to start condensing and consolidating everything you have into just one spot to make it easy to keep track of.
Okay, great.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.
Those writing mystery especially are really going to want to do some planning. If you are writing a mystery book by the seat of your pants, then you're going to have to be asking questions you don't know the answers to, and then figuring out what that answer might be, which some authors maybe can pull off. I think Agatha Christie even did this sometimes, where she would be like, she's admitted that in some books she would like just not even know who the killer was until the end, where she would sort of figure out from the clues that she had left behind who it could be. But most authors struggle to do that, so if you're writing a genre that really relies on complex plot movement, like mystery or thriller or something like that, or historical, then you probably want to really try to plan that out beforehand. Okay, let's ask... we have a question in the chat. What was that about just characters? I was saying we have this is an answer to Jimothy. We have a class that is focused on characters coming up in the course. It's week number 4 or 5. Let's hear from Jimothy. Do you want to tell us about yourself? What are you trying to write? Favorite authors? Favorite genres? I saw that your mic has unmuted, but we're not actually able to hear you at the moment. Maybe you have push to talk mode on? I can check back with you in a minute. Or maybe the mic is not connected properly. I would recommend, if you're struggling with the mic, maybe try downloading the Discord app for your phone and joining that way. If not, you can feel free to use the text chat for now. I'll come back to you in just a minute. Let's check with Kevin.
Hello?
Hi, Kevin. I can hear you. Go ahead.
Cool. Yeah, so some of my favorite, I guess, genres and books are, I really like comedy, like adventures. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I would count The Hobbit as like a comedy adventure.
Mm-hmm.
They're just so enjoyable to read. Like every page is, like it's just fun. It's just enjoyable. I'm from a sketch comedy group, so I am kind of like trying to write in more like that comedy style.
Mm-hmm.
And goals as a writer, just overall, just want to be a better writer. So,
okay. So you want to write comedic adventures, like the kind of thing you like to read?
Yeah, just stuff that's a little entertaining.
You might want to consider writing middle grade. If you hadn't thought about this already, middle grade books, people love comedy in middle grade, especially sort of adventure, like Harry Potter kind of like adventure kind of stuff. And those are a lot shorter too. You can write like a 40,000 or 50,000 word middle grade book, and it would just go a lot quicker than an adult book. So just if you hadn't thought of that, that might fit within the genres and the things that you seem to respond to.
No, it's funny because I was watching a few Goosebump videos, like analysis of them, and I've been wanting to pick up a Goosebump book. Like I used to read them in elementary.
I love Goosebumps. I used to read those all the time. That got me into reading.
And, oh really? Yeah. And I just love the cover, and it's like that blend of a horror with the comedy. Like there's always a lot of comedy in it.
Right.
Even just the idea of some of them, like, oh, there's a sponge under the sink that, has a demonic force into everything.
Right, yeah, the Goosebumps were all sort of like things that kids could relate to, or things that like kids could identify and were just easy to understand, but also had that kind of horror edge to them. Some episodes did, or some books still did traumatize me, but in a good way. Oh, thanks for that. Yeah, I would maybe just look around at the different age groups because some sort of target markets just really let you play around in that space more.
Oh yeah, that's definitely interesting. And like The Hobbit is a children's book, and that's one of my favorite books of all time.
Yeah, The Hobbit would if that came out today, people probably would not classify it as children's. But at the time, and I mean, Tolkien's intention was to write
It's a bedtime story.
Yeah, it's a bedtime story exactly. So as times change, then what people consider to be for different target markets might alter a little bit. But even going back in earlier, I mean, read like a Jules Verne book. Some of those were considered like children's fiction of the time, and it's like that would almost be considered literary today. Anyway, thanks for all the great info, and I recommend to authors if they have any interest in YA or middle grade and you hadn't considered writing them, maybe do think about it for a boot camp. It'd be really good just because they're much shorter than adult books for the most part. All right, let's check with Lorraine. Are you there, Lorraine? Okay, maybe not for the moment. Let's check with Marondo.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm just a beginner. I should like to engage myself on science fiction novels, especially AI, because I'm a software developer. So I should like to engage myself the other part, writing science fiction. Thank you.
Cool. Science fiction. Yeah, it can be really useful if you have a little bit of background in the technology that you're writing about. So, especially when you're trying to get published, they really like if you have a background in the same sort of thing that you are, portraying in your story. So that could be really useful. Thank you for that. Anyone else that I've had to skip or was having mic problems want to chime in now?
Can you hear me now?
Yep, I hear you. Go right ahead.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for having me here. So during the pandemic, I started writing just to deal with stuff, and I wrote over 400 short scripts and stories. And it got to a point where I should probably do something about it. So I'm checking out my options here. I double checked the whole script camp part, and now I'm checking this part out. Because I'm writing something, trying to make sure if I want it to be more of a script, as in turn into some kind of movie, or actually turn into a novel, because there's a lot more things I want to add to it, or maybe do both. So yeah, I'm just checking out my options here. I'm more of a short story kind of person. The last book or series or collections I read was the complete short stories of Ernest Hemingway. It's something I bring with me when I go camping. Yeah.
Cool. Okay. So are you thinking of writing a novel, or maybe just are you exploring maybe the idea of doing a series of short stories in a book or a collection or something like that?
At this point, it's either a full-length script or a novel.
Okay.
Basically, what I'm doing is at first it was a rehash of my dinner with Andre, but it's me talking to my cat, which I'm getting back. I've lost my cat for a while, but I'm gonna get him back, so I'm writing about it. There's a lot of words involved, so I'm trying to figure out how am I gonna finish this in what form. Mm-hmm. So, novel or feature-length script? Don't know.
Gotcha. Well, I will say that certainly sounds like an idea that could be pulled off in a book. It might be pretty tricky to pull off a movie like My Dinner with Andre with a Cat in features, but
Yeah.
It's possible. But a book just lets you kind of have a lot of the story take place in the characters' minds, or like in different kind of literary strange, it sounds like a what's his name, Murakami kind of style book, something like that.
Yeah. That's
Great. So that's interesting goal, interesting angle that you're coming at it from. Thank you for that. Anyone else that I had to skip past want to speak now? Lorraine, can you hear us? Okay, maybe not. Nacho, you want to anything you want to tell us about your interest or things that you are working on?
Sure. Yeah.
Nacho's the co-founder at Script Camp. Maybe you should introduce just
Sure.
who you are for the students here.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm a co-founder of the Script Camp, and I guess I like lots of different genres. I probably read more sort of mystery, horror, thriller, and literary, but pretty much into almost every genre. Yeah, and I think for this boot camp, I'm going to work on a rewrite of a novel that I wrote the previous NaNoWriMo.
Oh, cool.
It was like 2 years ago. Yeah.
So for those who don't know what NaNoWriMo is, do you want to tell them?
Yeah, so this is National Novel Writing Month. It's a lot of fun. A lot of people try to kind of prepare their outlines and everything and just get all the pre-writing done before November 1st. Our boot camp is going to be loosely coinciding with that, so that you should have most of your outlining everything done before November, and when you start the pages. So the idea is to try to write a novel in a month. And I wrote, this was 80,000 words, so I did, like 3,000 plus words a day. A couple days I did, like one day I did 13,000 words, which is the most I've ever done. And you're trying to just keep your momentum going and write lots. It's really hard. It's especially if you're working full time and you're just doing it for a couple hours in the morning or whatever. But it's very doable if you kind of break it into daily chunks, or even just bursts of like 10 minutes here and there, or 15 minutes, or however much time you have for writing. It's definitely possible to do 1,000 words, 2,000 words in a few hours before work. So yeah, it's a lot of fun. And at the end you'll have a draft. It will be a draft. It's not going to be polished. It's going to have probably lots of problems, but it'll be a fun kind of doing it. There's a kind of camaraderie among all the people who do NaNoWriMo. There are lots more resources out there, communities where you can kind of encourage each other. I'll be hosting some like writing sprints and stuff, activities like that, to kind of help everybody keep their word counts up. And there's a bot that will help you track like your daily word count and your goals, like how many words would you like to get done per day, that kind of thing.
Great. Thank you so much for that. So Nacho is our co-founder and also teaches the most of the Wednesday, Thursday classes on Script Camp. So we're both administrators on the server, so if you have a question or problem, you can message one or the other of us. All right, let's jump into the slideshow for today. Again, if you've not already joined my stream, you can scroll down to where it says my name under the Classroom channel. There should be a red button that says live, so if you click on my name, then you can join our stream and watch the slideshow. Carmen says, I need help with POV. We'll be talking POV tomorrow in our week 1 class, so definitely come by for that. All right, so what's in a page? So a page, like I mentioned, is variable. Using 12-point font, a page of single-spaced text is about 500 words in a published book. A page is about 250 words long, but don't worry too much about pages. We're thinking more about words. And when the actual writing process starts, when we go to pages, as I say, you'll be writing about 2,000 a day with the goal of writing a 50 to 90,000 word book by the end of the course. So books are not usually meant to be read in one sitting, and remember that most books are going to take between 10 and 25 hours to read. So chapters are a really nice way to break up a novel into sections and create this effective overall story structure, and just a nice way to give the reader a natural break. Those are usually going to be about 4,000 words long, but there are lots of exceptions to that. In YA and middle grade, chapters are usually shorter, and shorter paced chapters does lead to this more propulsive, fast-paced feeling to a lot of the writing, whereas longer chapters are sort of inviting the reader to settle in for longer periods. There's no real hard and fast rules about how long chapters have to be. You don't have to use chapters at all. If not, you're probably going to want to include some kind of breaks of some kind, and you may have seen some books use other organizational tactics as well, like having acts, or maybe like book 1, book 2, book 3, even within one volume kind of thing. So there's no rules in that. You can break that up however you would like. Target market is a way of saying this is the age group and the general demographic that our book is intended to interest. It doesn't mean that other groups won't ever read it, but it means they're less likely to, and this is also determining where the book is going to be shelved in a store, and what kind of art is going to be on the cover, and the ways that this is going to be sold and talked about and advertised. Our main sort of market is going to be adults, and it's our biggest market because there are more people that are 20 and up than there are people younger than that, just simply because there are more, there's more people above that threshold than below it. So expectation is that the vocabulary and structure in this might be a little more complex. Word counts are going to be higher. Pace can be a little slower. We expect readers, younger readers especially, to have a little bit lower attention spans and just they need to get into the meat of the story faster, whereas adults will give you more leeway to take a much longer time. And adult fiction doesn't necessarily mean it has to include dark topics or graphic violence or sex or language or any of these things, but you have that option if you want to use any of those different tools in your belt. We have this target market called new adult, which you don't actually see very much, and it's kind of a weird market that no one really agrees on. But basically protagonists are like 19 to 25, and this is going to concern like college stories and things like that. This one is mostly prevalent in self-published, and a lot of this is in romance. New adult is a tough market. I wouldn't really recommend aiming towards this. Usually you're going to pick YA or adult. Children's includes YA. So children's books includes YA, middle grade, chapter book, and picture books. YA is going to be books where the protagonist is a teenager, and they are written from that adolescent point of view, so not in retrospect as an adult. These are going to be faster paced. They're a little more like movies, and they're more likely to get movie deals for the most part. And they are going to include as much foul language and sex and violence as an adult book, but it might be a little less graphic with how it presents those things. It may not be, but you just have to keep in mind the demographic that you're writing towards, the kinds of things that they expect to see, and if you're writing a book for 14-year-olds, then they're not the ones buying the books for themselves. For the most part, it's going to be the adult that's buying it for them, and if they think it's not going to be appropriate for their kid, they won't buy it for their kid. Ebooks in YA, there is still a market for these because this is around the age when kids start getting their own tablets and readers and things and start making decisions for themselves as to what they're going to read, though. Middle grade, it's just parents buying the books for the kids. So this is going to be protagonist age and also target market being 9 to 13, more or less. Dark subjects will be handled much more delicately, but there are middle grade books that touch on darker ideas. Middle grade is going to be stuff like your early Harry Potter, your Percy Jackson, Judy Blume books, things like that. Chapter books is like ages 5 to 8 and is going to generally not include super dark topics, with very rare exceptions, except in the case of like therapy books or things like that. Picture books is going to be ages 1 to 5. That might be, they may have very few words per page. It might just be a sentence or two per page or a few words per page, or there may even be no words at all in some picture books, but this is going to be a pretty different market to write for. The word counts are going to be, I think, probably like 500 words or less. When you're querying these, you usually just send the entire text to the agent. I don't really know anything about writing picture books, so I'm not the person to ask about much younger children's markets. Any questions about the basics of these different target markets, though? The main ones being adult and children's. No questions on this?
I have a question about marketing.
Go ahead.
My question is, when someone targeting one market, what is the crisis if the market does not support the author to get the targets? So I want to know about it. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't quite understand what the question is. Are you asking what happens if the target market doesn't respond to the book or it doesn't sell?
Why one author don't target full market? If anyone target one market, isn't it risky?
Oh, risky in the sense that readers from the other markets then won't be as likely to buy it? Is that what you mean? So it does limit the audience a little bit just from having a target market, but there aren't really books that are for everybody. And we might think some books are sort of like, they're for anybody who is interested in this sort of thing, but they just need to know where to put it in a store, and they need to know how they're going to advertise it and how they're going to sell it. And so whether we authors like it or not, you're always going to sort of fall into one of these general categories. So we don't really have a choice. There are some books that have what we call crossover or crossover potential, which would be something like Harry Potter, right? Which Harry Potter is a middle grade series that the main character gets older over the course of it, so there's tons of YA crossover potential with teenagers, and lots of adults like Harry Potter too. So if you think that your book has potential to cross over between different markets, you can emphasize that, and you can let when you're querying literary agents, you can include that in your letter, but you still have to pick a sort of primary market. Like, who do you think will be the majority of these people interested in this book? You're just choosing like the main market, and then if the agent thinks that they can sell it like to a different market too, then that's really kind of more their job.
I would like to say something because I don't understand the target markets very well, but that's something that I'm really trying to understand. And now I'm learning the hard way that it's very, very important to understand the different target markets.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a very painful lesson. So I would definitely learn about it now and choose a target market and really fulfill the requirements of that genre, right? Is
Mm-hmm.
really what it is.
For sure,
So
yeah.
that's what I'm going to.
So yeah, understanding your target and also understanding your genre are really important, and just being able to clearly and succinctly identify the target market and genre of your book or any book are pretty important steps when you're getting going as a novelist, I would say, yeah. Thank you for the comment. Any other questions on this? So I'll just, maybe this is a question some people might be wondering, can I write an adult book about a younger protagonist, for instance, or can I write a younger targeted book about an older protagonist? The first one, you have a lot more room to do, so think of like any of the horror stories that are about a kid or something like that. And those are going to be adult books with just a younger hero. And we might also be, for instance, you're writing about an adult that flashes back to their childhood or something, so we wouldn't really be saying that the kid at that age is the hero. Normally, the expectation is that readers are looking for books about people that are their own age or within a couple years older. That's not always true, but that is publishing industry's expectations. So it's going to be a lot harder to write a middle grade or YA book about it. Well, first of all, you can't write a YA book about someone who's not a teenager. Middle grade or chapter book or something like that about an adult or with adult characters, I think might be possible, but in the current just way the industry works, in like 99% of cases, you're going to want to have your primary viewpoint character be someone of the age that the reader is kind of intended to be too. But then again, adult is a really broad category. We don't have to say this is for like older adults or younger adults. You just say adult, and that covers everything. Okay, so just keep in mind what the audience is looking for. There's a reason a lot of YA books have a love triangle in the plot, is because that is something that that age group is trying to figure out and navigate and think, who am I interested in? Who is interested in me? Like, these things are all just occurring to them now and are of great interest to that demographic. Middle school stories often involve middle grade stories involve a school plot element or going to school or characters that are in school, because that's just most familiar to that age group. Any of these books can be about any subjects, but just keep in mind the interests of your target audience, and you should be skewing the presentation of your story accordingly. So this class is going to be about writing commercial novels. My specialties are fantasy, horror, sci-fi, and historicals. Excuse me. So commercial fiction has broad appeal and the potential to sell a lot of copies. Everything really does have the potential to sell a lot of copies, but this is just the industry definition where they are saying it's written in a style that is most accessible and likely to be enjoyed by what we call the average reader. So examples of commercial fiction would be, Stephen King books, for the most part, J.K. Rowling, John Grisham, Dan Brown, anything you see in a supermarket or at the front of the store in Barnes & Noble, usually going to be commercial fiction. And these usually will fit into these very clear-cut subgenres like mystery, horror, romance, fantasy, science fiction, contemporary. Any of these things that are going to help us tell where is this going to be in the store, how are we going to advertise this, and who's going to be readers of what are going to, which readers are going to be interested in buying this. So commercial fiction does not mean something is written poorly or in a stupid or dumbed down way. Just like literary fiction doesn't automatically mean something is good. There's lots of bad literary fiction. There's lots of excellent, fantastically written commercial fiction. This is just sort of your goals and aims for that project, and it's going to adjust the style that you use. Like, if you're going to be using really advanced prose, really kind of crazy experimental structures, chances are that's going to be literary fiction, which are going to be more, quote, sophisticated in the sense that their intention might be to advance the medium as a whole, or to make some kind of change in the world or culture, or simply blow readers away with your really exquisite poetic prose. Some examples of these authors would be David Foster Wallace, Barbara Kingsolver, Cormac McCarthy, people like that are going to be winning things like, the Pulitzer Prize, the Nobel Prize, and they're generally having very sophisticated goals and intentions for their book beyond just, I want to write something entertaining. Usually they're trying to accomplish something else at the same time. There are lots of different types of literary books. These are going to be mostly slower paced, more poetic or flowery or innate language with longer and more complex sentences, experimental structures, very character driven instead of being plot driven, really intellectual ideas and not so simple or less than happy endings. So basically literary fiction is less interested in telling an engaging popular story as it is telling an intelligent and sophisticated story. We might in movies think commercial movies are going to be stuff that shows up at the the multiplex, and literary fiction is more like independent art house cinema, which is not to say this can't become incredibly mainstream. Some literary books are very popular, very mainstream. And then upmarket is the kind of midpoint between literary and commercial, where it might be more commercial sort of storylines, but with more advanced prose or something like that. Here are a couple examples that I've brought up where we could look at the post-apocalyptic dystopian genre. We have a literary example in The Road by Cormac McCarthy, which I think won, did it win a Pulitzer, something like that? And yeah, it won the Pulitzer, and is hugely popular, hugely successful, and pretty easy to read, although it is very literary in its ideas and the presentation of those ideas. Upmarket would be, again, between literary and commercial, so we could look at Margaret Atwood, who writes upmarket sci-fi for the most part, which are going to be, again, a little bit more commercial stories, but the presentation and the telling of those stories is going to feel a little more literary. And then on the far end, we have The Hunger Games. Oh, I'm right in front of it, aren't I? Which is going to be the most commercial version of this. This is the most popular, most accessible, easiest to read, and ultimately just the one that appeals to the greatest number of readers. Western, we can see more examples here. On the left, we have The Assassination of Jesse James, which is a highly regarded book by Ron Hansen, and it's also 800 pages long and really academic and dense. And then on the far right, we have things like these Red Ryan Western books, which are kind of the supermarket version of this, or that they sell a lot of these at the front of Barnes & Noble and like truck stops and convenience stores and things like that. And it's just going to affect the way that you're telling the story, the words that you're using, and the style and approach. Here's an example for fantasy as well. We have literary being something like The Buried Giant, Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss as upmarket, and we have things like the Dragonlance books or the Aragon books or Harry Potter as commercial. Any questions about literary, upmarket, and commercial?
Yes, I have one more question about marketing.
Go ahead.
When any author target a market, after targeting this market, if the person is new, what things she or he should know about the market and how they promote their books?
Somebody who's new at this, what are some things you need to know? Is that what you're asking? What are some of the differences between these different styles or something like that? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, promotion of books. How they promote their books.
I think I understand. So some differences between understanding these different markets would be this. In terms of commercial, you're generally putting the sort of genre thrills right at the forefront. Like, look at the cover of the commercial fantasy book. There's a dragon on it, right? That tells us, oh, okay, this is what you're here for, and this is what this book is definitely going to deliver on. Literary does not have to put those genre thrills up at the front, and it can sort of be more about dissecting the idea of what is expected in that genre, or it might be sort of deliberately changing the expectations of the genre, or just kind of doing its own thing. So this is really going to come down to fulfillment of reader expectations. And in commercial, we generally want to promise them right up front, there's going to be dragons in the fantasy book. There's going to be explosions in the action adventure book. We are putting those thrills at the very front. And that might also say something like, you know, if we are writing a commercial action adventure book, you might want to start with an action scene. And that's just sort of let the readership know, I know what you're here for, and I'm here to fulfill that. So commercial writing is all about fulfilling reader expectations. It can be in unexpected or different ways, but there's still really specific things the readers are looking for in commercial. They know what the genre holds, and they've read a lot of it. Whereas literary, they want to be surprised and challenged a little bit more. Does that make sense? Okay, I hope that answers that question okay. Any other questions on upmarket literary commercial?
Question, if you want to write, like, take on a certain style because you admire a certain writer or something, is when you develop as a writer, do you think that it's more... Oh, somebody trying to talk?
I think there was just some background noise in someone's mic. Go ahead.
Okay, so does a writer just, like, their voice emerges in the way that it emerges because it just does, or they can maybe have a part in saying, no, this is how I want to write, this is the style that I want to have, but it's like, it's just not going to happen, you know, you have the voice that you have and the style that you have, and it evolves and it takes its shape on its own without you really having much to do with that. Do you think, what do you think?
That's a good question. And everyone does this differently. Everyone looks at this differently. Some people will know, I definitely want to be a literary writer, for instance. And so I'm going to put everything I have into trying to write literary books. And maybe, for instance, somebody might read one of them and go, this feels more commercial to me. So you could be wrong. And some people might not know what their style or what their specific niche or thing is at all. And you have to just kind of let it emerge organically as you write book after book. And that is usually what I recommend. Unless you have something in mind, you're like, I know exactly the kind of writer that I want to be. Like, I want to be the next Cormac McCarthy. Well, then you know exactly what you're trying to do. But if you aren't 100% sure on that, I recommend just write what interests and amuses you. Write things that interest and entertain you enough that you're going to be able to spend a few months on them and finish them. And if you're doing that, then, and having a good time and, you know, accomplishing your kind of goals that way, you will eventually land on some kind of style. Like, a style will just come out. So I guess the answer to your question is both / either. Does that... I hope that at least gives you some answers there.
Thank you.
Sure. So yeah, we are trying to decide what kind of writers we want to be, but you may not know. You may just have to try stuff out and see what happens. And that's part of the fun of this. That's part of why we like doing this. Okay, let's keep going through this. We've got half an hour left. Let's talk genres. So some genres have much stricter rules, and we should ask, first of all, I guess, what is a genre? So a genre is going to be, it's essentially a set of expectations, tropes, and general indefinable vibes that the story exudes. So you're going to, I think we have a really good sense of what the genres that we like are, or what makes that genre tick, but we have to kind of be really aware of what the reader expectations are for each of these. And what, for instance, might the reader almost feel cheated if they didn't get in those books? The genre is telling us the kind of book it's going to be, the kinds of things that are going to happen in it, and the kinds of thrills that we are offering, the kind of entertainment that we are offering to the reader. So we're going to look at some different genres and maybe talk a little bit about the expectations of a few of these and the general things that you need to know when writing some of them. I know less about some of them and more about some of them. For instance, our first one here, contemporary, is not my favorite. I've only read probably 10 or less of these in my life, but these are going to be realistic, modern-day stories that take place in our world with no sort of impossible or speculative elements. Speculative elements being something like sci-fi or fantasy, or something that asks, what if the world were actually like this? Whereas contemporary is saying, oh, this is the world as it currently stands. And as a result, we are going to be exploring modern day realistic drama issues. And we might, in movies, we're going to call these either drama or comedy or dramedy. It might have a very funny voice to it. Contemporary doesn't mean super serious drama. It can be as light and funny as you want it to be. But generally, this is called realistic fiction. Stories that happen to real people in real settings that are current and today. And these are stories that are not falling into other categories or genres. So, for instance, if there's a really strong romance plot and you're calling it contemporary, there's a chance it might just be romance. So these take place in the same time period that the reader is living. So, you know, early Judy Blume books are still contemporary, even though they were written in the 60s and 70s, because they were contemporary at the time. And they're going to feature things happening things that could happen in that time period. So some contemporary books might contain shades of another genre, like Holes, for instance, is a pretty famous YA contemporary book that has a bit of a mystery kind of element to it. So you can include bits of other genres in there, but generally contemporary is like realistic modern day stories that don't fit into other genres. I hope that's pretty clear. Anyone a big reader of contemporary, or is this anyone's favorite genre?
Yeah, I mean, I would say probably more contemporary stuff, but like, you know, contemporary genre fiction, I guess. So like mysteries, thrillers, that sort of thing. I don't know. Do you kind of differentiate between those, or I mean, a lot of these, a lot of grid books sort of overlap a couple different genres, right?
They certainly can, yeah. But generally when people are not usually going to describe something as contemporary mystery or contemporary fantasy. Like, you can, but generally people are just going to call that mystery or fantasy. When it starts to have too many genre tropes, or you're fulfilling too many expectations of other genres, then it will stop being contemporary. Contemporary is like a genre on its own. So contemporary would be something like, you know, and you're right, there's a lot of crossover if you think of something like The Fault in Our Stars. Like, John Green books are really, really popular YA contemporary, and that has a really strong romance, like, plot line to it. It's not a romance book, though, because remember, we'll get in a second to the strict rules of romance writing. But, like, The Fault in Our Stars is a contemporary book through and through. It's about modern realistic people with modern realistic problems that don't fit into other genres. So hopefully that this is clear what this means here.
I guess we could say it's sort of a little bit more, you know, maybe kind of social or current events relevance, maybe.
They can, yeah, definitely. Go ahead.
Than a typical, than like a straight mystery, right, or a straight thriller may not really touch on those kinds of issues, right?
Yeah, for sure. You have a lot of room to talk about things happening in the world today in contemporary books, more so than almost any other genre. Although, in other genres, we still talk about the world today, but usually through a sort of parable, right? Like science fiction or horror stories are often kind of about the world as it is now, but through this lens or this filter of fictionalization and imagining and speculating on things, whereas contemporary is more about these are the actual issues now. So yeah, often social trends will change what people are looking for in contemporary, definitely. Let's keep going. So horror, this is probably my favorite genre. I've read a lot of horror. I got started reading Goosebumps, which are middle grade horror books. And I love it. And what are we looking for in a horror story? Readers are not necessarily always looking for gore. There can be as much gore as you want in a horror story, but there can be more quiet, contemplative horror as well. Basically, horror just means we're trying to make the audience feel fear, disgust, repulsion, and we're going to use that for entertainment value in some kind of way. So a horror audience knows what they're looking for. They really like imaginative monsters or a different kind of like threats. Like the threat is usually the hook of a horror story. It's like, this story is about a werewolf that eats people, or, you know, it could be about a serial killer. Like the danger or the threat is usually at the heart of what makes horror work. So we like to see new and different stuff that we haven't seen before in terms of the threat a lot of the time. So some variation of a monster or that we haven't seen before. Maybe you have some cool idea of how vampires could work, or maybe you have some fantastic idea for a cult or a serial killer or something like that. The difference between something like horror and crime is that crime is going to be more matter-of-fact about the procedures that are used to investigate the case. So you could, for instance, write a serial killer story in the horror genre or more in the crime genre. Something like the Zodiac, like the investigation of the Zodiac killer, is going to be more crime because that's realistic and it really happened, and We're focusing on the procedures used to catch that criminal, whereas horror would be something more like Seven, the Fincher movie. Let me think of book examples instead. Horror would be something like, Pet Sematary, where freaking out and scaring the audience is pretty much the main way that we're intending to entertain them. But there might be other stuff too. There might be a lot of really heavy drama. There might be some comedy, like if we have like a Grady Hendrix book. Grady Hendrix is a sort of popular modern commercial horror author who writes kind of like horror comedies. We're about to start seeing way more Grady Hendrix movies, if you were wondering. But yeah, lots of different room and lots of different flavors in horror. This is not just one thing. It's not just slasher movies. It's not just possessions and exorcisms. There's plenty of really interesting and literary work which is happening here. So horror is a very exciting genre to a lot of literary agents, and it's kind of having a resurgence in the book world right now. Let's see, we have a question in the chat. Tamana says, oh, sorry, I think I had to mute Tamana for a moment because there was some background distortion on the mic, but I will unmute her now, or him. 1 second. Why can I not see my full list of members of the chat?
Hi, can you hear me?
Oh, I hear you now.
Yeah, I'm not sure what you mean by distortion, but I just entered, I just had a question, if that's okay.
Sure.
About, like, how to create compelling conflict.
Okay.
Because one of the issues that I was having is, like, I'll start the action in my story, but then I'll kind of lose track of it in the middle of the story or towards the end when I'm trying to create that resolution, especially in a thriller.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm wondering if you had any, or thriller drama, if you had any suggestions on that.
Sure. So let me ask first, are you really extensively outlining before you write these books, or are you kind of figuring out as you go?
I think, for the most part, I, like, will write as I go, but then I do have a general outline. It's towards the end that I'm like, where's the story going? Kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
I see. Okay. So my first tip is going to be, if you're struggling to write complete and coherent books with consistent conflict throughout using this kind of spontaneous pantsing method, maybe try planning more extensively for the next one and writing a really detailed outline/treatment before going into it, because that will just be a time where you can solve those problems beforehand, and you will be able to identify the weak points in the narrative and find those moments where the conflict is sagging or is lacking early on, and nip that in the, you want to solve those issues before you even write any pages. And this is the method that I teach, and just the style that I'm going to be emphasizing in WordCamp as we go through this. We're trying to solve those problems off from the beginning. In terms of how do we maintain the conflict and how do we make sure that the conflict is enough to power or fuel the rest of the story, first of all, you have to have had a central conflict first that was big enough or important enough, and the stakes were high enough that that the conflict naturally allows it to take the space of a full-length narrative, right? So you need to, first of all, just make sure the stakes are super high and are constantly escalating throughout. We want to make sure that as your characters are coming into, or encountering obstacles and overcoming them and moving on to the next one, that they are having various costs exacted on them in terms of resources, relationships, and so in that way, one conflict can kind of spread out and cause more problems, right? If the conflict of the story is my character is trying to win a dance contest, well, that's going to start causing problems at home, right? They're never home for dinner, so they're going to start having conflicts with their partner or their family. And if you have a strong enough and high stakes enough conflict, then escalation is going to be really the key to making that work all throughout the story. And think of different ways that conflict can affect other parts of your characters' lives, and make sure that we are fleshing it out as much as possible and really making that conflict feel substantial. So you want to have a really bad problem that gets worse throughout, I guess is how I would be just summing up the basics of compelling conflict throughout the whole story. Is that helpful, or does that start to answer the question there?
Yeah, that's really helpful, actually. Thank you so much.
Sure, no problem at all. And we'll talk way more about that as we get more into plotting. In the first 6 weeks of the class are all about figuring out what happens in my story before I write a single page. So maybe give a shot to this really, really, really detailed, organized planning process beforehand. And I think you might find that it will be fixing a lot of these issues with figuring out where the story goes when you're about halfway through. thank you for the question, though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have another question?
No. You can't see me.
I can hear you.
We can hear you, Lorraine. You can mute yourself if you want. There's a small gray microphone icon. If you're on a phone, I'm not sure exactly where it would be, but yeah, for the most part, students stay muted in class, but we frequently have times to unmute and ask questions or speak out loud, so no big deal. Okay, I'm going to continue with the next few of these. Again, feel free to use our text to let us know if you have a question. I'll stop every once in a while just to check the text chat. You can find that by mousing over the Classroom channel and clicking on the small white word bubble that says Open Chats. Okay, let's keep going. So, what other genres do we need to talk about today? Fantasy, this is mostly what I'm writing nowadays. And I am a huge reader and consumer of these from childhood. I think in fantasy we want to see originality and new ideas. It's, sci-fi is mostly going to be really focusing, on new ideas. Fantasy, people like to see stuff they haven't seen before. People who are heavy fantasy readers, we've read a lot, and we know what all the tropes are. We know what to expect, so originality will get you a lot of points. That's not to say every single story has to be totally mind-blowing, and if you want to write fantasy in the more traditional Tolkien-esque worlds with, orcs and humans and dwarves and elves, you absolutely can, and there still is 1,000% of readership for that. But just think of, how can I make it my own? How can I make it stand out a little bit? There's no reason that your vampires or your dwarves have to be the same as everyone else's dwarves or everyone else's vampires. But then again, if you make the character work and the dialogue compelling enough, then it may not matter that you're just playing essentially in someone else's toolbox. If you think of the Western, for instance, a lot of Westerns are in the exact same sort of setting, sort of set of tools, and the audience doesn't mind as long as the character work is detailed and interesting and original, and there's always going to be something you can do to draw that reader in. Fantasy is much more than just knights and castles and medieval stuff, though, so if you are interested in fantasy, open your mind to all the different kinds of variations of this that exist. We have contemporary fantasy, urban fantasy, which takes place in modern day. We might have prehistoric fantasy, which is going to take place in sort of Stone Age type settings. We might have space fantasy or science fantasy, which is going to combine elements of sci-fi. Something like Star Wars is science fantasy because it's got both, right? So there's plenty you can do with this. It's much more than just King Arthur and Harry Potter. So this is going to be stuff that can either be on the very literary end or the very commercial end. There's just a lot of versatility in this genre. What else? Romance. So this is the one I know the least about, so I actually looked up all the rules. So first of all, this is the top-selling genre. Let me just move out of the way so you can see that slideshow. So this is the top-selling genre. It is exceedingly popular, especially after ebooks and audiobooks became more popular. This really picked up and is massive. All over the world, this is the top-selling genre. So there's a couple things a romance story needs to have. One is a central love story that's going to center around individuals of any gender falling in love and struggling to make that relationship work. A writer can include as many subplots as they want as long as that love story is the main focus of the novel. And the second thing is an emotionally satisfying and optimistic, happy ending. In a romance, the lovers who risk and struggle for each other and their relationship are rewarded with an emotional justice and unconditional love. So that is how people expect romance. This is not rules written by me. These are written by the Romance Writers Association. In order for something to be romance with a capital R, it is going to have to follow these basic rules. Now, there's plenty of room for variation within that. Different kinds of endings, which this community in particular has a ton of different acronyms and little turns of phrase they use to explain different kinds of plot elements. But sometimes they'll put it right on the cover. They'll say this has a happily ever after ending. They'll put that on the cover, or like even in the section of on the shelf of the romance bookstore that they're in, they will have a sticker on the shelf that says these are all happy endings. So the audience knows what they want in this genre. You can vary that, you can change that up, you can subvert that however you'd like, but you should just know this is what the audience is reading for. Romance novels may vary in tone and style, be set in any place and time, and have any level of sort of graphicness to the sensuality in them, from, really sweet sort of puppy love all the way to your 50 Shades of Grey erotica on the other side. You can do whatever you want there, but just that central love story is really key, and the emotionally satisfying and optimistic ending is also a really key part of the capital R romance genre. Jimothy asks, would optimistic nihilism count as an optimistic ending? I don't know. I'm not sure. I think that I would guess that there'd be some way to pull that off. I would guess also that romance readers are generally not reading for nihilism, so be careful with that, but I would think that it would be... there's a way you could do it, yeah. Again, I'm not an expert on this, though, so romance readers probably know the rules way better than I do, and anyone who writes this is going to have to do some research to figure out how exactly the genre works, or no matter what your genre is, you should definitely be doing some deep thinking on how your genre works. Any more questions on this? Okay, let's keep going. So mystery, we had somebody even mention they were writing mystery in the class. And I think after, I'm going to cover just one or two more of these, and then we're going to maybe have some time to talk about your idea a bit, just because I mentioned we're going to have that chance. I'd rather use that than really just skimp on one of our other sections. I've gone over the whole process of writing the book, haven't I? Yeah, I think I have. So, yeah, let's talk about our own projects after I just cover one more genre. We have a couple more here. We have mystery, thriller, action-adventure, and sci-fi. I'll just say, like, a quick thing about sci-fi. Sci-fi is really, really, really powered by ideas, and different, interesting, original ideas are going to get a lot of attention in sci-fi. So originality in all genres is like a consideration, but in sci-fi, people really read for originality. Let me just remark on mystery really quick. So in mystery, you have to play by the rules. You can't really cheat the reader, or else the reader is expecting... So consider in mystery, the reader is kind of playing a game with you, that they expect you to be following the rules if they follow the rules. And if you following the rules means all the clues have to kind of add up, and you can't mislead the reader constantly for the entire thing, or have the answer be something that there's no way that anyone could have thought of. You sort of have to write so that the conclusion is something that an attentive reader could have figured out on their own. And this go back to like Encyclopedia Brown or Nancy Drew or Hardy Boys books, and those really short form, older kind of mystery novels are going to... They're not that old, they're from like the 60s, aren't they? But they are going to just be a really short, condensed version of what readers are looking for here. In those books, remember, you can flip to the end of Encyclopedia Brown and look at what is the solution to this mystery, but it should be something the reader can figure out on their own. We don't want to be deceiving them, or they're going to feel cheated, and they're not going to like that. So, honesty is important when it comes to mystery. You can play with perspective, or you can find different ways to mislead or deceive the reader as much as you like, but at the end of the day, they don't want to feel cheated, and we want to feel like you played fair. Okay, so I have things we can talk about these other genres next week. We can talk more thriller and action-adventure next week. I'd rather, though, in this time right now, just have anyone who would like to tell us about the thing they're writing, or maybe ask more questions about it, or just share, like, I don't know, maybe a minute or so of whatever it is you're interested in, or the kind of thing you want to work on. Let's just have open floor towards the end, and you guys are free to talk about your own projects or ask about projects however you'd like. So would anyone like to unmute and just tell us about what they're writing or what they're planning to write?
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
I hear you fine. Go ahead.
Yeah. Mine's going to start off with the two main characters meeting, and they kind of like each other straight away. But then he doesn't tell her that he has a wife and 2 children, and he's also just came out of Cane Hill Mental Institution.
Mm-hmm.
So I've got sort of sad, tragic parts, but I'm bringing them up with comedy. I do stand-up comedy.
Okay, great.
So I know how to go for that.
Is it kind of would you say this is going to fit into the romantic comedy genre?
I should think so for this point in the book, but it is a true story, so it can go anywhere.
Oh, it's a true story, so it's nonfiction?
Yeah.
Okay, that's interesting.
Actually true, yeah.
Well, so the nice thing about writing novels is that we have a lot of room to sort of change details as needed, or fictionalize certain things if you want. So I guess maybe, can I just ask, are you intending to write the entire thing exactly as it happened in real life, or do you have a little bit of room to sort of imagine details or to change facts?
I think you'd have to have some imagination into it because the tragedy in it's quite poignant. So you have to bring the audience back up and wanting to know what's happening next.
Okay, so you're saying it's sort of inspired, like heavily inspired by a true story?